Parliament as the winter session kicks in, the big GST debate as well to counter it. An intolerance discussion will also dominate mind space in the initial days of the Parliament winter session starting. Shobhana, Bhartia, the Chairperson and Editorial Director at Hindustan Times Media, joins us now. Well, Shobhana, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. What's the expectation at all? Is this going to be more fruitful, or are you expecting this session also be shouted down?
I personally expect this session to definitely be more fruitful. I think it's quite difficult to fall below the levels of the last Parliament session. In fact, after 2010, it was by far the worst in terms of the number of hours spent by Raj Sabha. So I think in any which way, it's difficult to equal that, so it has to be better. But I personally feel that at least the initial signs seem to be auguring well. The fact that there has been an all-party meet and they have discussed topics that they would like to debate as opposed to just shout down the House. The fact that the government is also reaching out. You see, the charge of the opposition always was that the government never reaches out, that nobody is talking to us, we are not taken into confidence on any issue. So I think the meeting that was held yesterday morning by the government, I mean the Speaker's meeting was separate, but the government called an all-party meeting, asking everyone, trying to take on board what they wanted discussed. And they also reached out in the sense of trying to discuss issues pertaining to GST and briefing the opposition about the forthcoming talks in Paris on climate change. So I think this session definitely should be a huge improvement on the last session.
Okay, Shobhana, morning. From a market's point of view, there's only one bill that everyone wants to get passed, which is the GST. And on that, you know, the capping of the GST at 18% is something that the opposition wanted as well. What in your mind would be the more realistic or more feasible rate that the GST can finally, or that we can see finally go through?
I really don't think I can comment on what that rate should be. I mean, the opposition wants it at 18%. The ruling party had sort of come up with a higher percentage. I think the moot question here is, after having arrived at a rate, whether or not that should form part of the main bill, because the Congress feels it should be part of the constitutional amendment, because if not, then there will be pulls and pressures by the states, by the government to deviate from that. And the ruling party feels that each time you want to tinker with it, you have to go back and get two-thirds majority. So therein, I think, lies the main question, that will that be incorporated in the constitutional amendment, or is that to be kept outside of it? I think at the moment they are sort of more stuck even on the modalities. I mean, so the absolute rate, of course, is one issue, but I think there have been indications from the BJP that they are also happy to go along and keep it at a lower rate. But the point is that if the Congress insists that it should be part of the constitutional amendment, which way will the ruling party go? Will they accede to that? Because then changing it or tweaking it for whatever reason going forward will become that much more difficult. And it will be important for them to be able to muster that kind of support. So I think that remains the more sort of the more pressing issue in terms of just the rate. Of course, the fact that both sides have started talking on GST is a good sign. The fact that the government has asked the opposition to form a group and they want to talk to them, they want to address all the three concerns. So at least one sees there's some movement. The Congress Vice President also has said on a number of platforms in the last 4 or 5 days that they are happy to discuss the GST. So I think somewhere the realization that they were the authors of this bill and they need to also get some credit and ensure its passage. I think somewhere that sense of responsibility does seem to be an issue, and it is dawning on them. So hopefully there will be some progress on that.
Okay. Do you think bills other than the GST could get passed, amendment bills really? For instance, the bankruptcy code, that's yet another very important bill that the market is hoping will get passed. Any chance that there will be conciliation on these things?
Well, there are some low-hanging fruits, and therefore, whether it's the Whistleblower Act, whether it's the
Arbitration.
bill that you spoke about, the arbitration. I think some of these much depends, on the kind of floor management by the ruling party. The fact that Bihar has been a feather in the cap of the opposition will, in a sense, kind of unite them further. So the ruling party has to try and reach out, and frankly, I think they need better floor management. If that were to happen, and if the opposition sort of goes along and this debate on intolerance does go off, one can expect some of these other bills to see easier passage, because I don't know how far the Congress will want to be seen as being obstructionist each time, because it does have diminishing returns to constantly not allow any bill to move forward, not to allow reforms to carry on. So much will depend really on the tone and tenor. I think it was more that in the last session than any particular issue. The fact that the opposition felt very cornered, the fact that they felt that the behavior was rude, the fact that their mics were muted, that whatever they said got muted. So there were many of these other extraneous elements that actually vitiated the atmosphere. So I think a lot depends on the floor management, how they reach out, and by reaching out, try and get the opposition to help them pass some of the other bills which may not be as controversial as perhaps the GST has been.
So just one final question then, Shobhana. Outside the Parliament session, there is quite a bit of work that the government is doing as well, whether it's, the recent rebooting of the road projects or the export subsidy, or, a whole host of other issues in the coal sector, etc. What's your own view on that? Do you think that there is a speeding up or acceleration of the reform process, or is there still a lot to be done?
Well, it's a bit of both. There is actually a lot happening at the ground level, and roads is one very important indicator. But having said that, one can constantly look back and say, if this has happened, things would have been better. If interest rates had been lowered earlier, things might have picked up faster. The fact that the land bill has got mired in controversy and is stuck is making, the offtake of projects a little more difficult. So yes, there is scope to do a lot more, also because of the absolute numbers that the government has, also because of the disproportionately high expectations that people have from the government. So relative to that, I would say they have a long way to go, but it's not to say that nothing has happened at the ground level.
All right, Shobhana, we leave it at that and hope, as you predict, that this session is an improvement over the previous. As you say,